first we're going to start out with looking at this clip of Donald Trump speaking recently, and he says the quiet part out loud about why the GOP is so adamant about going after transgender people and why they all seem to be lock and step in agreement with how they want to go after the LGBTQ community. So let's watch this clip here.
Critical race theory, transgender insanity, and other inappropriate racial, sexual, or political content on our children. It's amazing how strongly people feel about that. You see, I'm talking about cutting taxes. People go like that. Talk about transgender. Everyone goes crazy. Who would have thought 5 years ago you didn't know what the hell it was? But one that
wow, that awkward laughter from the crowd. Wow. So you got Trump here saying 10 years ago, no one even knew what transgender people were, and it wasn't an issue. And you guys, I talk about cutting taxes and it's light applause. And when I talk about transgender issues, I get a standing ovation and it's way louder. So the GOP has, for years and years and years, been really ever since the 2015 the 2015 Supreme Court decision that codified gay marriage rights into all 50 states in the United States. And ever since then, the Republicans have made it more and more and more their agenda to call out this way of life that they disagree with and do everything they can to legislatively make it harder for LGBT people to live the life that they want to live. Okay. And as the politicians all have their messaging in lockstep, and they've all been saying the same things about LGBT, the Republican Party has largely gone right along with it. And even in instances when they have family members that are LGBT or people that are close to them in other ways that are LGBT, well, guess what? The Republican voter base is more likely to go along with what the Republican politicians have been saying about the issue for a long time now. So before a long time, it was gay rights and just homosexual marriage and lesbian marriage that the Republicans had such a problem with. Ever since the 2015 Supreme Court decision, it's gotten harder for them to do that. So now trans is the new the new group to attack, because the laws are not as clear as day protecting transgender rights as they are gay marriage. So go ahead, and to illustrate my point, I'm going to bring up this Insider article that says this is from yesterday. It says Trump welcomed transgender women in his Miss Universe pageant years before he started campaigning on excluding them from women's sports. Trump took credit in 2012 for ending the Miss Universe pageant's ban on transgender women. He welcomed the participation of Jenna Taklova, a 23-year-old transgender woman. And now Trump is campaigning to ban trans women from competing in women's sports. Former President Donald Trump has become an outspoken critic of transgender women competing in women's sports, frequently discussing the topic at his rallies, but in the past welcomed them in a beauty pageant he ran. CNN's Andrew Kaczynski, I'm not going to try to say that last name. CNN's Andrew resurfaced Trump's stance on trans women competing in the Miss Universe pageant, which he owned from 1996 to 2015. Trump gave several TV and radio interviews in 2012 in which he celebrated the participation of Jenna Talakova, a 23-year-old transgender woman, for partaking in a pageant in Canada. Several news outlets from April 2012 credit Trump specifically with reversing the pageant's ban on transgender women. Trump told CNN at the time he and Miss Universe organization had decided to reverse the ban even before they heard Talakova had enlisted women's rights lawyer Gloria Allred to help her challenge it. Michael Cohen then Trump's personal lawyer told E! News that Trump and the organization made the fair and just decision to allow Talikova to compete in the Miss Universe 2012 Canada pageant. So as you can see, before, the Republicans were whipped up into a frenzy about this issue, and there was political points to be scored by being against transgender people. Trump was actually pretty open to the issue, and you know, he went as far as allowing a transgender person to compete in his own pageant. So if he morally deep down felt so morally aghast at transgender people, you know, why would he ever allow one to be anywhere near his pageant? He would have the final say. You know, Trump has the final say of who and who isn't allowed in these sort of these beauty pageants that he used to run. And you would just think that he would be a lot more outspoken against allowing a transgender person to compete in his pageant if it was what he actually morally believed. Now, I don't think the Republicans actually morally care one way or the other. They just want to score political points. And not only do they want to score political points, but they also want to distract from their policy, which in many cases, in all cases, is to cut taxes for rich people and cut funding to welfare programs and funnel money upward from the lowest part and the poorest people in our society, to funnel money upwards from them and the middle class to the 1%. That is the Republicans' one policy that they consistently have had. And if people aren't riled up, worried about transgender issues, and all this stuff that doesn't really affect society in any sort of meaningful, tangible way, what they'll pay attention to is stuff like this. The article from Common Dreams here: new GOP bills would hand richest 1% over $28 billion in tax cuts next year. The poorest fifth, meanwhile, would get just $1.4 billion in tax cuts under the Republican legislation. Wow. I mean, this is their only legislation. This is their only policy. Tax cut legislation that House Republicans are set to consider this week after pushing the global economy to the brink of disaster would deliver more than $28 billion to the richest 1% of Americans next year, and just $1.4 billion to the poorest fifth of the economy. That's according to new analysis of the legislation by the Institute on Taxation and Economy Policy, ITIP, which estimated Sunday that the poorest fifth of Americans would receive an average tax break of just $40 next year under three new Republican bills, one of which is titled the Tax Cuts for Working Families Act. By contrast, ITEP showed people on the top 1% of income distribution would see an average tax cut of $16,500 under the legislation. The wealthiest 20% of Americans would receive a total of $60.8 billion in tax cuts next year under the new bills, which are unlikely to pass the divided Congress. Down here of who gets what. Poorest 20%, $40 less. 20 poorest percent, 190 less, and then it goes up 340, 420, 840, 1,850, 16,000. Because everybody knows that the people who really need a break in this country are the richest people in the country, because that's who we need to help out, but no welfare for the poor. It's just crazy. I'll go ahead and leave this whole article in the description, but as you can see here, this is no, as they try to frame it, this is no tax cuts for middle class working families. Okay, if I'll put it this way, if you have somebody that's telling you they're hungry, and in order to satisfy their hunger, they are going to need 2 slices of pizza. Okay, and you tell that person, you know what, I'm willing to give you a half of a slice of pizza, but I'm gonna take the rest of the pizza for myself. So here's your half a slice of pizza. Aren't you glad you're not getting no pizza at all? At least you got a half of a slice. But I need 2 slices to live. Well, take your half a slice and be happy with it. What cruelty is that? What inhumanity is that? I mean, it's just crazy, okay? If people knew what the Republicans wanted for this country, they would not vote in such high numbers for them. But this is why they distract with the transgender stuff. It's all this big distraction, okay? And then here's another policy point that they would like to distract from is Republicans plan to cut free school lunches. Newsweek. Yeah, you heard me right. Cut free lunches. The largest ideological caucus in the House Republican Conference is proposing steep cuts to free and reduced school lunch programs nationwide, citing the need to prevent widespread fraud present in the program. How about we audit the Pentagon? How about we go after some of the fraud that happens there and the misuse of funds that happens there? Embedded deep in the Republican Study Committee's recommended budget released Wednesday night, the plan calls for a series of reforms designed to cut federal funding for school lunches and encourage states to increase their shares of funding for the program. A move the RSC argues will encourage state legislators to restrict the eligible population receiving school lunch to truly needy households. The decision comes on the heels of the sunset of a widespread expansion of free school lunch programs during the COVID-19 pandemic, a policy decision the federal government said actively proved to reduce childhood hunger. So it goes on, it says, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, food insecurity nationwide fell 7 percentage points from the start of the pandemic to 14.2% by the end of summer 2021, a sign that the U.S. Census Bureau claimed that was a direct result of the expanded school lunch programs. A majority of those with children receiving assistance were already receiving food stamps, while about half of the families using programs reported either having difficulty meeting monthly expenses or needing to borrow from friends and family to make ends meet. Many others who traditionally relied on the program, however, did not report similar circumstances, fueling arguments from conservatives that the program was ripe for additional oversight and regulation. Okay, so their argument is there might be a few people who they could theoretically afford to pay for school lunch. So we're going to restrict funding and lower the funding and allow states to allocate funding how they please for school lunches, just because we think that a few people might be getting school lunches that they shouldn't be. It's like, that's just crazy when you have statistics that say from the USDA that say that the pandemic era expansion of food assistance for children reduced food insecurity. So what that tells me is that the federal government providing more money and providing more assistance to families who need help buying lunch for their kids, that reduces childhood hunger, and that reduces the stress that families have to worry about when sending their kid to school. It's one less thing to worry about. At least they're going to get fed, and they're going to come home and they're going to be fed, and that's that. The argument that a few people might be getting school lunches that they shouldn't be, so we should restrict it and potentially increase food insecurity and go back to pre-pandemic levels of childhood food insecurity, that is just outrageous and abhorrent policy. Okay? When you have how many people in the US that would agree that school lunches should be free? Okay, an overwhelming majority of people would agree with that. Okay? And also what you're leaving up, if they were to have their way, they'll go, oh, well, we're not directly restricting school lunch programs. We're not directly reducing the funds. But what they're hoping to do here is to change the laws so that states could enact their own laws that could potentially reduce the number of people receiving free lunches. And that's going to make food security go up. So it's abhorrent policy. And again, the reason that the Republicans are so adamantly against transgender issues and LGBT issues and their way of life is because it gives people a red herring to pay attention to that's going to keep their attention and their eyeballs off of, again, the Republicans' abhorrent policy that exists. All right.